Okay, so we're going to be talking about Fort Sumter today. So we're going to start off with some of the big misconceptions about Fort Sumter. First off, it doesn't just matter because a civil war started there. Fort Sumter was made because after the War of 1812, the United States government was like, hey, we need some defense around here, and they put money towards it. And they built the fort where it is now because it already had protection from Fort Moultrie in the north and Fort Johnson from the south, and so that way any ships that try to come in that slip past the two major forts would have to deal with Fort Sumter. And at the time, it was a revolutionary marvel of architecture and engineering. It was made with modern masonry and modern guns, which made it a very formidable force to fight against, especially when you're on a ship. So when it was made, the United States government was trying to make sure that Britain and France couldn't come in and blockade the port of Charleston. So when the South attacked Fort Sumter on April 12th and 13th, it really couldn't do anything because the United States government made the fort to fight ships, and so most of its guns were facing east towards the ocean, not towards the two forts to the north and south of it. And so when the forts opened fired on Fort Sumter, it really couldn't do anything except take the shells. In fact, you can see the remnants of it now if you go to the park. There are cannonballs stuck in walls, and also, those walls used to be between 40 and 55 feet tall. And now, after that battle, they were beat down to just about 17 to 20 feet tall. This battle did major damage to Fort Sumter, and yet Fort Sumter really couldn't do damage to the other two forts, or really anywhere unless it was a ship, because all of its guns were facing the ocean. Another problem with Fort Sumter is the fact that it is on an island, which makes it very difficult to replenish its ammunition after it's been shot. So when you look at Fort Moultrie and Fort Johnson, they could just dish out a ton of damage, and then they could have carts and horses bring in more ammunition. Meanwhile, Fort Sumter would need a ship, which would be absolutely impossible to bring to the island during this battle because the other two forts could just take it down really easily. Even Castle Pinckney could have shot down ships trying to get to Fort Sumter. And so not only was Fort Sumter weaker because its guns faced east, it also did not have the firepower to take out these other two forts or even hold the fort for that long. If you ever go to Fort Sumter, you'll learn that it was originally designed to hold 650 men and 135 guns on 2.4 acres of land. And it never got to be that full. In fact, around the Battle of Fort Sumter, it had 450 Union soldiers and 83 guns. And remember, when I say guns, I mean 4 to 5 ton cannons that look like this. They're huge. They're 17 feet long, and granted they can pivot, but it'd be extremely hard to move. And now, as many of you guys are probably thinking, they could have just moved the guns to another firing hole, which they did have facing the forts. And granted, there were some guns already there, but moving a 4 to 5 ton cannon around a 2.4 acre fort with 400 other men running around is very difficult. And then moving the 800 pound to 1,000 pound ammunition that these cannons used would also use a lot more labor. And so instead, the fort used smaller guns like 12 pounder artillery guns to fire outwards. And granted, they did use the cannons, just not as much as you're probably thinking. The main users of the 12 pounders, though, were actually the Confederates because they were easy to maneuver and a soldier could hold 4 to 5 rounds of ammunition for it if necessary. So both sides saw that it wasn't exactly worth it to have 4 to 5 soldiers carrying an 800 pound cannonball while being shot at, and so they went for smaller guns. But something that's absolutely insane throughout this entire battle is within Fort Sumter, not one person got injured. Even though it was night, and it was in April, so during spring, so they probably had allergies, between the nights of April 12th and April 13th, not one person was injured within the fort, because it did its job so well. The only casualty, actually, that happened was the fact that when they surrendered and they're doing their 100-gun salute, it shot one of the Union soldiers. And so it wasn't even during the battle, it was after when they were leaving the island on a ship to become POWs, which is insane. This fort did what it was supposed to do. It was just the fact that the Confederates outplayed the Union in the first ever battle of the Civil War. Some more interesting facts about these forts is the fact that Fort Sumter was made out of 2.5 million bricks. And before the war in 1829, the government paid slave owners to allow them to use their slaves for a short period of time. And you go to the fort and you look at these walls and the bricks that you're standing on, and you see fingerprints and handprints. And then you're told that these bricks were pressed by children. and that these are these children's fingerprints and handprints left in the bricks 200 years just about after the war. And it's truly depressing. You see what our government was built upon, and that was seen as normal back then. What's even more ironic is that they used this fort to help the Union, even though it was the first battle of the war, and the Union stood for anti-slavery. They used a fort that they used slaves to build to fight against slavery. Then, what's even sadder is that Fort Moultrie, the fort right next to Fort Sumter, was actually where 80% of the slaves in the South that were imported came in at. So these slaves that might have actually come in on ships were put in Fort Moultrie and then bought and then told, hey, you're going to build another fort, which is going to be used right next to Fort Moultrie to make sure that you remain a slave. And something that's also crazy throughout this entire thing is that Fort Moultrie and Fort Johnson and Fort Sumter were all still used after the Civil War. Even though they were built with slave labor, the United States government still used them, all of them, all the way up until 1947. I hope this video helped you guys out with the Battle of Fort Sumter, and please remember history. It is so important, and I also hope that some of you somewhat understood how terrible slavery actually was. I hope you guys visit Fort Sumter someday, and I'll see you around in class.